And we're in.
We're in.
Welcome
to Mystery
Team
Inc.
Inc. I'm Maggie.
And I'm Kayla.
And I forgot how to do a podcast.
It's fine. It's like riding a bike.
Today, we're all going to learn how to do it together.
Yes. This is first and foremost an educational podcast.
Yeah. That's it.
Yes.
Yeah. It's edutainment.
Edutainment.
Thanks for being patient. If you were joining us and you've been waiting for the second part, this past month there's been a lot going on for us, for me mostly, but for both of us. So thank you for being patient. Do you have any business?
I just wanted to remind everyone that we are filming, and even though we're filming, I want to reassure everyone we're not going to be doing anything differently. It's all going to be the same.
If you want to see how it's all the same, watch our YouTube. You can watch it on our YouTube channel.
Exactly the same.
Mystery Team Inc.
I'm ready.
You look great.
Thank you. These are on my glasses. Okay.
Oh my God, it's perfect.
I can't hear you.
Okay, good.
Let me see if I can.
Perfect.
I'm going to send this back to Amazon. Cut that out. Okay, we can do this for the intro.
Perfect. Any business?
No, I think I'm looking my best and ready to go.
Okay, great. When we last left our hero, she had just flown across the Atlantic. She was the first woman to ever cross the Atlantic in a plane, but she was not flying it.
This is disappointing to me. Learning that was disappointing.
Oh, don't worry. It's going to
get worse. Okay.
It's going to get better. So while she was in England, she met a famous Irish aviatrix named Mary Heath.
Love aviatrix.
Can I just say this whole episode is basically just a who's who of cool aviatrixes from the 30s.
Glad there's more than one.
This whole episode is literally just, and I had to make time to go because in my source for this episode and the last episode and the next episode, this is going to be 3 parts. I'm sorry. For everyone who is just hearing that news, I know it's coming as a shock and you are going to have to grieve the fact that you thought you'd be done with it by the end of this episode, but it's going to be 3 parts. And my source for these episodes, she doesn't go too in depth about who they are. So I did supplemental research and every single one of them has an amazing log line of who they are. So
oh my God, I'm so excited.
This episode is mostly just a who's who of cool female flyers.
I love it.
So while she was in England, she met famous Irish aviatrix Mary Heath, who herself held several first flight records. She was an Olympic athlete, a writer, a women's rights activist, and she was the first woman in England to receive a commercial pilot's license. She let Amelia fly her plane, and Amelia fell in love with it, and she was like, would you consider selling it? Mary sold it to her for $3,200. Despite the fact that Amelia was actually in debt and didn't have any money.
Women helping women.
Yeah. And she was like, well, Amelia did not yet know how much her life was about to change after being the first woman to cross the Atlantic in a plane. And I think Mary knew. I think she was like, you're good for it. Just pay me back when you get your checks. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Before she shipped it to Amelia in the US, she had a plaque affixed to it that said, to Amelia Earhart from Mary Heath, always think with your stick forward. Which is a reference to when your plane stalls out, the stick actually controls the speed. So if it's stalling out, you want it to go faster so you can get more lift. If you push up the speed when it's nosediving, you're going to go straight into the ground. But it's a reference to when your plane stalls out, it's your inclination is to slow down because your engine is sputtering. But if you push forward, you'll actually just catch lift from the air. So she wrote,
aww,
to Amelia from Mary, always think with your stick forward. When Amelia returned to the U.S., she went to Denison House, the settlement house where she was a social worker. The women there later said that she didn't even talk about her flight. She just asked how they'd been. She missed them. And she stressed to the papers that she wasn't just an aviator. She was a social worker bringing goodwill from America to British settlement houses.
Aww.
She hadn't acknowledged yet that her life was about to change forever. But she was about to because Henry Ford gave her a limousine. President Coolidge sent her a telegram. She went on a tour around the Northeast with the pilot and co-pilot and was chaperoned by her publisher, George Putnam, and his wife, Dorothy. And the whole trip, no one gave a flying frick about the pilots. They were all just like obsessed with Amelia. This podcast is explicit. And so...
Yeah, we're going to say stuff like flying frick.
I don't know why I started censoring myself so much in the past. I think it's because we started doing live shows and I wasn't sure in the beginning if I was allowed to say bad words.
We're allowed to say swears.
Yeah, we are allowed to say swears.
Not too many, though, because my mom will get mad.
So yeah, people, and that's not totally true. Like people cared, but they were way more into Amelia than they were into the pilot and co-pilot. She published a series of articles in the New York Times about her flight. And before long, George had published her book, 20 Hours and 40 Minutes, Our Flight in the Friendship.
It took 20 hours and 40 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
Isn't that how long it takes now?
I think it takes like 10 hours now.
Oh, but with security and taxiing and blah, blah,
It's a 20-hour travel day. The foreword for her book, her first book, reads, "In rereading the manuscript of this book, I find I didn't allow myself to be born. May I apologize for this unconventional oversight as well as for other more serious ones, and some not so serious? I myself am disappointed not to have been able to write a work, you know, Dickens' works, Thackeray's works, but my dignity wouldn't stand the strain."
I love her so much.
Me too. Through George, her publisher, Amelia was able to get a job writing for Cosmopolitan as the first aviation editor, writing articles about flight.
Does that exist today?
I don't believe
was
so.
she first and only? Was she like one of three?
I don't know if there were more after her. I think the book says she's the first, so there must have been another.
But she also could have been the only. You're technically still the first.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
At any rate, she wasn't the one writing like how to use donuts to spice up your sex life. Like at the time, Cosmopolitan was like not what it is today.
Was it like how thick can your stockings be before you're a harlot?
I'll give you an example of how different it was. It had articles about flight.
Huh. I like that.
Me too.
But also makeup back then was just like pinching your cheeks and like saying a prayer, right?
No, makeup back then was like lead paint,
Oh, yeah.
pinching your cheeks and saying a prayer.
Right.
In 1928, Amelia decided to attempt her goal of flying across the U.S. Some of her stops were planned, others were not. During her trip, she sent a telegram to her mother and to George Putnam every day of the trip. In several towns, she would land in a farmer's field, and then she would just tell the farmer, like, she hated staying in hotels because people would always bother her, and they'd be like, you can stay here. And then she'd be like, perfect, thank you.
Did she have to sleep in a barn, or was it like...
No, she would stay in, like, their guest room or whatever.
What if they don't have a guest room? How does she know?
She would sleep on the couch. She would just stay at people's houses.
Wow. She is bolder than I.
I know.
My mom would have to come get me in the middle of the night.
Mom, can you come get me? I'm in Kansas.
Do you think anyone was like, get the flying frick off my
No,
land?
I don't think so. People loved her.
She's
she
so
was
charming.
a huge celebrity.
I forgot. Yeah.
Everyone, she's like this.
Oh my God, she's a celebrity.
She just became a huge celebrity because she just flew across the Atlantic.
It's like if Usher came and like knocked on your door and was like, I don't have anywhere to, I hate staying in hotels.
It's like when you hear about like a boy band's tour bus breaking down and they like come knock on someone's door and they like, you need to use their phone. This is the 90s in case you forgot. Yes.
I think Rachel Bloom did that in the wildfires a few years ago.
She did. Yeah. I remember
God,
seeing an article about it.
Much.
Navigating this flight was difficult because her new plane from Mary Heath, which was an Avro Avian, had an open cockpit. So she had to safety pin her maps to her knees. And then when she was flying, if she flew off the edge of one map and onto the next, she had to change them midair. So at one point, her map of Texas just blew away. And she ended up overshooting Texas as a state and landing in New Mexico.
Oh, my God.
After the town of Pecos, New Mexico, gave her fuel and a bed for the night, locals had to push her plane to help it take off. And one of them accidentally did put his foot through one of the wings. And they had to glue a tablecloth over the hole so she could take off and finish her flight.
Hold on. I think I'm confused about plane technology history.
Mm-hmm.
Were her wings?
At this point, they were fabric, I believe. Yeah.
So how high was she flying?
It might not have been fabric. It might have been some kind of wood, but
it's definitely something a tablecloth
could cover, yeah.
Do we know how high she was flying?
I don't know at this point. She goes on to break an altitude record later with a different plane. But it's 1928. Like, the Wright brothers took off like a decade ago. We're like not that far into aviation history.
Okay.
On the last leg of her trip land to Los Angeles, she had a forced landing in a field in Long Beach and flipped the plane over.
We call that sunning.
It happens to the best of us. She finally landed at Mines Field in Los Angeles at the end of her trip on the last day of the National Air Races and Aeronautical Exposition. She landed on the airstrip in between two male pilots who were straggling in from the competition, and when she landed, she got a standing ovation from the crowd, even though she wasn't in the race. Afterwards, she flew back to the East Coast and became the first woman to fly solo across the U.S. and back.
Oh my God. I love her so much. I really have a lot of questions about what these planes looked like and how high she was flying and how fast.
All of the planes were different and they all went different speeds. I mean, we're going to talk about it later, but it's like people entering races and stuff were like flying planes with like totally different capabilities.
Against one another?
Yeah.
That seems unfair.
I know. You're going to hear about unfair in a minute. It's 1928, and this is about a woman pilot. So get ready.
Great. I'll save my rage.
Fuckle the buck up. Dude, you're going to need your rage later in this episode, I promise. During all of this, she was still engaged to Sam Chapman, who was still patiently waiting for her to decide to settle down one day.
Oh.
But their relationship was nearing its end, and Amelia told her sister in a letter that Sam should go out and do whatever makes him happiest. She said, "I know what I want to do, and I expect to do it, married or single."
Oof.
In 1928, she ended their relationship. Sam Chapman never married, and according to Susan Butler, he never got over her, though they remained friends for the rest of her life.
Oh, no.
On July 1st of 1929, Bill Stultz, the pilot of the Friendship, died while stunting in his plane. It had crashed into a roof and then straight into the ground.
Oh, yikes.
He was carrying 2 passengers, and an autopsy revealed that he was drunk.
Oof.
He was 29. Amelia and Lou Gower attended the funeral. Remember when they flew across the Atlantic and she...
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you want to recap that anyway?
Sorry. When they flew across the Atlantic, she said there were like liquor bottles stashed in the plane. And later, George said that, or Amelia said that she almost told George about it because she thought they needed a replacement pilot, but she was afraid they were going to call off the whole flight. So she just did it anyway. And George later said it was either the smartest or dumbest thing she ever did. In 1929, the National Air Races and Aeronautical Exposition announced that for the first time ever, women would be allowed to compete. But don't worry, it wasn't because of feminism.
Oh.
Do you know why it was?
Because someone's wife wanted to do it.
It was actually because of capitalism.
Ah, yes.
The usual suspect. So they had decided that if women flew, it would prove that aviation was safe and promote the industry.
Let me just get my extra eyeballs out so I can roll them.
Not in an Amelia Earhart way that's like, women should be allowed to do stuff outside the home. Just in like a, if we can convince wives to fly, husbands will fly.
Yeah. If your soft little muffin of a wife can fly, then you can too, you manly man.
Okay, that's almost the exact quote. This is from the marketing director.
Oh, God.
If the feminine is considered the weaker sex, and this weaker sex accomplishes the art of flying, it is positive proof of the simplicity and universal practicality of individual flying. It is the greatest sales argument that can be presented to that public upon which this industry depends for its existence.
I mean, it's kind of a thing where, like, women are thrown into things and then they're like, oh, we can do that. Fine, it's ours now. Thank you.
Yeah. The Women's Air Derby, which was nicknamed the Powder Puff Derby,
you know,
by the press.
I kind of love that.
Let's like take it back.
Yeah.
The Powder Puff Derby would start in Santa Monica, and then it would have various stops along the way and end in Cleveland, Ohio after 9 days. But then the men were like, ooh, we don't want the women to get tripped up by the big mountains. So let's start east of the Rockies. And actually, just for safety, they should all fly with a male navigator.
Oh!
So all the pilots who were planning to fly in the race were furious, and Amelia wrote a letter on behalf of them saying, As for suggesting that we carry a man to navigate our own course through the Rockies, I, for one, won't enter. None of us will enter unless it's going to be a real sporting contest. How's a fellow going to earn spurs without at least trying to ride?
I love the word choice of carry a man.
Yeah, me too.
Ooh. Ooh.
So they reinstated the original rules.
Did they let the ladies fly over the mountains?
They let the ladies fly over the mountains.
Wow. Bold.
Amelia needed a new plane because her plane was considered the toy class. So she purchased a new Lockheed Vega and entered the Derby.
Did this one have tablecloth arms?
I'm not sure. Tablecloth arms. I'm not sure, but I know that later in the story, when she gets a Lockheed Electra, it's the first all-metal plane, civilian plane. So we're not even at all-metal outside yet.
You know what? Women can do stuff, but I wouldn't do this.
That's fair. That's totally fair.
Ooh.
19 women set off from Santa Monica. An aviator named Marvel Crossan immediately had engine failure and lost her life due to a defective parachute. She was at the time the holder of the current women's altitude record and was known to be a talented flyer. Ruth Nichols, another pioneering aviator and friend of Amelia's, struck a tractor on a runway and destroyed her plane but survived.
Who the fuck's tractor was it?
I know. Well, keep in mind, they're landing basically on like these little runways like across the Midwest, and then they're taking off, and a lot of them are like in farm fields.
I know. I just feel like there's like a big plane there, and she's like, all right, here I go. And no one's like, give me a second, I'll move my tractor.
You know what it is, and this happened a lot of the time, is it took a long time to take off, and they didn't always know exactly how much runway they were going to need, like how much, like it was hard. Like sometimes takeoff would take minutes, and so you just be like driving at 100, not 100 miles an hour yet, but at like 60 miles an hour for as far as you could until the plane lifted off. So sometimes at the end of the runway, there was just like a barn.
Yeah.
And it was like, good luck, I guess.
That makes sense.
Poncho Barnes, who would later become the founder of the first movie Stunt Pilots Union,
Ooh.
another talented aviatrix, overshot a runway and also destroyed her plane. 16 women successfully made it to Cleveland, Ohio. There were other accidents, which the press obviously had a field day with. But Amelia pointed out that with 16 women crossing the finish line, the Powder Puff Derby actually had the highest percentage of finishers of any cross-country race at the time for women or men.
Ha
Take that, men flyers.
Men flyers.
We should start calling male pilots male pilots.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, you don't do that? You don't go like, oh my God, I saw a male cop the other day.
Amelia came in third in that race. Susan Butler tells us that because she knew she had such a fast plane, she carried some of the personal baggage of the other competitors.
I love her so much. Carry other ladies' baggage, not a man.
Yeah. Yeah. Correct. Also, do you know how much having a male navigator would have weighed down their planes?
Yeah, like 300 years of social progress.
Correct. Before the Derby, Amelia had spoken to Ruth Nichols about the need for a women's flying organization. Once the women landed in Cleveland, Amelia, Ruth, and several of the Derby flyers decided to make plans for one.
Oh.
Clara Studer, who made a weekly newsletter for women pilots, sent out a call asking for all licensed female pilots to gather on November 2nd at Curtis Field in Valley Stream, New York. 26 women showed up, and in deciding what to name the organization, Amelia suggested that they name it whatever the final number of members to enroll was.
No.
And in the end, 99 women joined.
No.
And so the 99s were born.
That's the cutest possible number it could have been.
Today, the 99s have 5,100 members from 44 countries, and they still exist.
I can't. I'm so glad it wasn't something stupid like 71.
I know. I could make an entire episode about the 99s. They're so cool. It's just like 100. It's 99 women kicking butt at being pilots.
I think we'll add this to our list of hour-long dramedies to make.
Yeah, you're right.
We have what do we call the one about what is it? Shadows?
Mm-hmm.
Night of Shadows?
Mm-hmm. Band of Shadows.
Band of Shadows.
Yeah. Initially, the group was just representatives and no president. But then a few years later, in 1932, when they did decide to have a president, Amelia was elected the first president, obviously.
Surprise. Do we think there was like any woman who was like, of course it was fucking Amelia?
Maybe, but it seems like they all really liked each other.
Uh-huh. There's one girl.
Yeah, there's always one girl, like in Dorothy Martin.
Oh, yeah. Who's like, God said not to talk shit about me. Amelia's actually like not better than the rest of us. Like, she's a good pilot, but like, so or like, why is she? Oh, because she did charity work. Yeah, I guess that's like really good. And she's really nice and like charming and beautiful and talented. But like, why does that mean that I can't?
What's funny is that a lot of people who are fans of Amelia Earhart say that there were more technically proficient female pilots than her. Like she was like all of the things. Like there was nobody who was doing like taking the risks she was taking, having the technical prowess that she had, like writing the books, making the fashion line. We'll get into it. Like she was just doing things that like nobody was doing what she was doing.
Yeah, she's like a full package.
Right.
But that doesn't necessarily mean she's like the best pilot. So I just like am not 100% sure why.
It's about building a brand.
We all know that girl though.
We do.
Who does not understand the importance of building a brand. It's not just talent, ladies. You have to trick them into thinking you can make them money.
That's true. In November of 1929, Lockheed let Amelia fly the new Vega, which had a 425 horsepower engine.
Wait, when did Martin get into that picture? Lockheed and Martin. Isn't it Lockheed Martin now?
I don't know. I assume they merged later on. Now Lockheed is like the military.
But is it Martin? Did I make that up? Is it Lockheed Martin? We can cut this out. I'm genuinely curious.
I think it is Lockheed Martin, or it was.
Like, it's like, when did Mayer join Metro Goldwyn, you know?
We talked about that in our...
Oh, I don't even know my own middle name.
It's Martin. Yeah, remember in William Desmond Taylor, we talked about when Metro Goldwyn Mayer became Metro Goldwyn Mayer. In November of 1929, Lockheed let Amelia fly a new Vega with a 425 horsepower engine, in which she immediately broke the women's speed record at the Van Nuys Airport.
Ooh, we love the Van Nuys Airport. Very convenient, not as crowded as LAX.
We love the Burbank Airport.
Okay, so it goes like Burbank, and then like Van Nuys, and then like dig a hole into hell.
Yeah.
And then the 9th level of hell, that's LAX.
Yeah. Amelia and her publisher turned agent and manager, George Putnam, had grown steadily closer since the day they met.
Trick them into thinking you can make them money. That's the whole thing.
A few months after her transatlantic flight, he wrote to her, "Your hats, they are a public menace. You should do something about them when you must wear them at all. Some of them are cataclysms, but I hasten to add the Pittsburgh bonnet is a peach, as are several of the floppy ones with bits of brims." He was like, your hats are a public menace, but I do like the floppy ones.
That's so cute. I also like the floppy one. I thought I was going to return this, but I might just like put it in our future office.
I love that.
I love her. Okay.
George had even been in her plane when she crashed it early in one of her cross-country solo flights, and she jokingly called him Simpkin, which was a reference to the cat from Beatrix Potter's The Tailor of Gloucester. And he would sometimes sign his cables to her Simpkin.
Do they fall in love? Or is this just going to be a cool platonic relationship?
Just sweet. This is a girly podcast, so obviously it has to have a romance.
A girly podcast. I did have a makeup catastrophe this morning. And I watched so many.
Your makeup looks great.
I cried into it.
That's the secret.
Yes. Okay. Here's what I learned.
Put tears in it.
I learned this over and over again and I forget. I want like a smudgy like eyeliner that kind of goes into like a little wing. Mm-hmm. And I try to do that with like my crayon liner and then it doesn't work. And then I just like get it off with a Q-tip. And then the trick is fuck it up and then clean it off with a Q-tip. And then what's left?
Yes. That's good to know.
Exactly what you want. Yeah. So just destroy it and then quickly try to clean up your mess and everything will be fine.
Productivity tip. Move your crying block of your day into your makeup block of your day and do both at the same time. That'll save you 15 minutes.
Then you can wake up 15 minutes early and do a quick yoga workout.
That girl.
Make some juice.
This is that girl.
Oh my God. Sometimes I try to be that girl. I had a conversation with a 25-year-old in my department and she just like wants to be that girl so bad. And she is like, I used to wake up super early and exercise and like do all this stuff. And now I'm just so tired. And I'm like, dude.
The era of that girl is
We're
over.
done with that.
We're
Absolutely
done with
not.
it.
And she doesn't even want to like exercising is not like something she enjoys. She did it because she
No.
thinks she's supposed to.
Yes.
And I was like, do you think that if you sleep in as much as you can and then come to work, like after work, you'll have more energy and time to dedicate to like the things that you want to prioritize after work? And she was like, yeah. And I was like, then fuck getting up and cleaning.
Yeah.
If that's not who you are, that's not who you are.
No. And if your body needs to rest.
Rest.
Rest, I say.
We are all that girl. We're just not all the same that.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
In 1929, George wrote an article about his best-selling aviation books, which included Charles Lindbergh's autobiography. And he wrote, the most dramatically interesting...
Is it called If I Did It?
It's called If I Was into Eugenics, which he was. This is what George wrote. He said, the most dramatically interesting bit of manuscript that has passed over my desk was written under unique circumstances. To date, it is in a class all by itself and likely will remain for some time to come. This particular manuscript was written in a plane as it winged its way over the Atlantic. The author, of course, is Amelia Earhart. It's a humorful, modest volume set down with unusual literary skill. The same year, George attempted a first flight to Bermuda, but the whole thing was a disaster, and Amelia was like, don't do it. They only made it to Norfolk, Virginia, and he later said that Amelia never once said, I told you so. She had, and I should have listened.
That's like one of the hottest things I've ever heard of a man saying.
Yeah, I agree. In December of that year, Dorothy amicably divorced George because Dorothy had another man in her life.
Who's Dorothy?
George's wife.
Oh. Ooh.
Yeah, I know. In 1930, George's uncle died, and he was the one who was in charge of G.P. Putnam's Sons Publishing. George's whole life was the publishing house, and he'd been working there for over a decade. And before his death, his uncle had drawn up a plan for George to buy out his shares and take over the company when he died. When his uncle died, his uncle's son, who was a mining engineer working in Africa, suddenly decided that he wanted to run the company, despite the fact that he'd never worked in a publishing house or expressed any interest in publishing the whole time his father was alive. He bought out his father's holdings and put himself in charge and laid George off. He then immediately ran the company straight into the ground and went bankrupt and had to sell it because he didn't know what he was fucking doing.
God, that is so freaking annoying.
George was heartbroken. It was like his whole life.
Why? Just stay in your lane.
Yeah. George stayed single for about a year after that because he was newly divorced, and then his uncle died, and then he lost his job and the publishing company. According to George, he proposed to Amelia and she turned him down at least twice.
Nice.
She eventually changed her mind and accepted his proposal, and in January of 1931, she called a few of her guy friends together and she was like, if I get married, is it going to end my career? Because I'm concerned. And her guy friends were like, George is actually the person, he's like the person who started your career. And he really loves being your manager and he loves publishing your books, and your career is like really important to him. So actually your career is probably going to be like better.
Yeah.
If anything, like, and she was like, fuck it. So on February 6th, they called George's mom and they were like, we're coming to spend the night at your house and we're getting married there tomorrow. Surprise, you're throwing a wedding.
Oh my God, I would lose it. I would be like, we're having Costco cheese platters and LaCroix that I stole from work.
You're out of the mini geishas.
Excuse me. I'm throwing, my nuptials are happening tomorrow.
Sheet cake? Sheet cake, Costco cheese puff ball. It's just crafty. I just want crafty at my wedding.
Yes, correct.
At my backyard wedding.
I want Nature Valley granola bars.
Yes.
Some like stone
people
fruits.
When you get married, people can throw that in the aisle instead of rice. Like throw the granola bar crumblies.
Neither of us are Jewish, but if we were, I would stomp on the glass and a Nature Valley granola bar.
George later wrote, she wore something as simple and forthright as herself and not new, bought for the occasion. A brown suit, I think, and a casual crepe blouse with a turned-down collar. And as I remember it, brown lizard shoes. No hat, of course.
Oh my God, I would get married in my iconic hat.
No,
I
'cause
need
their
to find
joke
an
was-
iconic hat right now.
You have one down there.
I know, but I kind of need to make it like do like my own thing.
Okay. No, that was their inside joke, was that he hated her hat.
That's why she should have done it.
Yeah, you're right. Well, listen, this is crazy. So just before the ceremony, she wrote him a letter,
No.
which he never revealed until after she died.
No.
Listen, it says, "Dear GP, there are some things which should be writ before we are married. Things we have talked over before, most of them. You must know again my reluctance to marry, my feeling that I shatter thereby chances in work which means so much to me. I feel the move just now as foolish as anything I could do. I know there may be compensations, but have no heart to look ahead. In our life together, I shall not hold you to any medieval code of faithfulness to me, nor shall I consider myself bound to you similarly. If we can be honest, I think the difficulties which arise may be best avoided. Please let us not interfere with each other's work or play, nor let the world see our private joys or disagreements. In this connection, I may have to keep some place where I can go to be myself now and then, for I cannot guarantee to endure at all the confinements of even an attractive cage. I must exact a cruel promise, and that is that you will let me go in a year if we find no happiness together. I will try to do my best in every way. A.E."
Holy
This is like,
shit.
and that was just how she felt. She was like, I have to do this for myself. And she wrote, and George accepted the terms. He was like, he later said that basically it was like that. He saw it as like, that's who she was.
Yeah.
And he loved her for who she was. So this didn't like scare him away. He was just like, I accept.
What did she say about an attractive cage?
I love that line.
You
She
read it
said,
again.
I cannot guarantee to endure at all the confinements of even an attractive cage. And part of the reason that their relationship worked is because he let her do what she wanted to do. And that's the kind of person that she was.
Yeah.
It's not for everyone. Like,
No.
that's not the kind of relationship that I would want to have. But like, that's who she was and she knew it. And he loved her for who she was.
Yeah.
And that was the relationship they were going to have.
Yeah. For me, it's like if you so much as look away from me for a nanosecond,
Yeah.
I assume that that's it. That's not true. You have at least 10 seconds.
The two were married in a small ceremony at his mom's house. That year, Ruth Nichols became the top American aviatrix, taking away the altitude record from Eleanor Smith and the speed record from Amelia. She announced that she was going to follow the Lindbergh Trail and be the first woman to fly solo from the U.S. to Paris.
It's such a huge bummer that Lindbergh, like his side hustle was so egregious.
I know. In June, Ruth flew to Harbor Grace, which is, if you remember, that's like the jumping off point for transatlantic flights where Amelia was before. She flew to Harbor Grace to make a transatlantic flight. But when she was making a scheduled stop in New Brunswick, she came down too late and crashed her plane into a cliff, wrecked it, and broke 5 vertebrae in her back. She had her plane repaired and her back was put in a cast. And a few months later, she was flying again.
Oh, wow.
But by that time in the year, the weather was too bad for a transatlantic flight. So instead of crossing the Atlantic, she went and broke the long distance record, crossing the U.S. with her broken back in a steel corset.
Oh, my God.
In the spring of 1932, she was ready to try to cross the Atlantic. There were other aviatrixes who also hoped to beat her to the punch, including Eleanor Smith, who had been the youngest licensed pilot in the world at the age of 16. And at 17 in 1928, on a dare, she'd flown her plane under all 4 of New York City's East River bridges.
Oh.
For this, she received a 10-day grounding from the city of New York, and the reprimand letter included a request for her autograph.
So good.
What no one knew was that Amelia and George had already planned Amelia's transatlantic flight down to the last detail. They'd brought on an advisor, a pilot named Bunt Balkan, who you may remember because Bunt was the Norwegian pilot that George had crossed paths with on the ferry, who had told him about the flight and the friendship.
Oh my God, I forgot about the Norwegian pilot.
Meanwhile, Amelia was learning to fly blind using only the instruments on her plane because, as we talked about last episode, she was used to flying using landmarks on the ground to know where she was. And when you fly across the Atlantic, there are no landmarks. And if you're flying in fog, you don't know what direction you're going. So she was learning to do instrument flying.
Yeah.
No one, not even Amelia's mother, was told about her plans for a transatlantic flight. And Amelia made no post-flight plans, period. There were no like parades. There were no stops. George didn't even go to Europe to meet her. In May, an ex-Army flyer with a faster plane named Lou Rikers attempted a transatlantic flight and failed, running out of fuel in the dark and, quote, belly flopping his plane right next to the SS Roosevelt. He was injured, but I believe he survived. Ruth Nichols came to dinner at Amelia's on a Sunday, and they talked about transatlantic flights. But Ruth had no idea that Amelia was even planning a transatlantic flight. And what she really didn't know was that she was actually ready to leave any day now and was just waiting for the weather to clear up. The next day, she was gone.
Yes.
At dusk on May 20th, 5 years to the day that Charles Lindbergh made the first ever solo flight across the Atlantic, Amelia Earhart climbed into her Lockheed Vega with some tomato juice and a thermos of soup and roared off into the eastern sky.
Oh.
And that's where we will pick back up after the break.
No.
Tomato juice and soup.
That's what you
What
would
is
take.
she, me?
Yeah.
We'll be right back.
After these messages.
And we're back.
We're back.
Welcome back to Mystery Team Inc.
I'm so excited.
You ready?
Yes.
Okay.
But I feel like I'm about to be sad.
Okay.
Okay. Be sad.
An hour into her flight, her altimeter failed.
Mm.
The device that measures altitude, I wrote. Very smart.
Thank you.
So she flew by moonlight and used her eyes to determine how high above the ocean she was.
Something about Flew by Moonlight, maybe my first album, or like, I just love that.
I do too. 3 hours into the flight, she smelled something burning and discovered flames coming out of her exhaust pipe. Turning around and navigating back to Harbor Grace and landing on an unlit field in the dark with a shit ton of gasoline that she was carrying actually seemed more dangerous than pushing forward, so she pushed forward. 4 hours into the flight, she flew into a black storm cloud that was too high to fly over. The storm was supposed to be further south than her route, so it suddenly became apparent to her that she was not on course. The rain turned to ice and the controls froze over.
But did the rain put the fire out?
Hopefully. The fire was like in her engine, so
I know.
I don't know.
Maybe it was like squirmed in.
Yeah. The rain turned into ice, the controls froze over, and her plane went into a spin. How long we spun, I do not know. I know that I tried my best to do exactly what one should do with a spinning plane and regained flying control as the warmth of the lower altitude melted the ice.
Wow.
What? She like...
So smart.
Well, yeah, just fucking wait. So she started using the fuel mixture control and the carburetor to measure her altitude. I don't understand how engines work, but basically, from what I understand, and I read an FAA airframe power plant mechanics power plant handbook to understand this, and I still don't, but
I feel like that's the last place to go to understand this.
well, this is a plane from like 1930.
I know, but the handbook would be like, anyway, so
it'd be like, so add more gas, and if you're a woman, stop flying that plane. So basically the way it works is because the air is much denser at sea level than at high altitudes, there is an ideal mixture of air to fuel in the engine. And when it's too dense or not dense enough, then there's not the right like amount of oxygen getting in to cause the explosions that make an engine go. So there's a manual mixture control so that when you're flying at a different altitude, you can change how much air is getting in.
Oh.
So what she started doing was she used that control and the carburetor's response to tell how low she was flying. So for example, I think what she was doing was basically opening it up all the way. And when the carburetor starts sputtering because the air is too dense, she knows she's too close to the ocean.
Whoa.
Right. Doing this is really dangerous and it's hard because it's called leaning the fuel, quote unquote. So like at any point you're in danger of stalling your engine. Whatever she did, it was fucking cool as hell and very smart. And according to Susan Butler, she says, when Ben Howard, another fine pilot, heard about it later, he said, I thought, doggone it, I don't know many pilots, that is many men pilots, who would have had sense enough to do that, let alone a gal.
So close.
I know. But the point stands that like even most male pilots would not have thought of that.
Yeah.
After the sun rose, it was cloudy, but she was able to fly above the clouds. Then, when she flicked on her reserve tanks of gas started dripping down her neck, and she discovered the cockpit fuel gauge was defective. Realizing that she was not going to make it all the way to France, and with gas dripping down her neck, she headed for Ireland. She saw small fishing boats and realized that she was close to land, but she was worried that she was off course because that storm had been, was supposed to be way farther south than her route. In actuality, it was the storm that was off course from the prediction, And when she landed her Vega in a pasture in Colmore, Northern Ireland, she discovered she'd been exactly on course.
Whoa.
After a 15-hour flight, 5 years to the day after Charles Lindbergh made the first solo flight across the Atlantic, Amelia Earhart became the second person to ever fly solo across the Atlantic Ocean, the first woman to ever fly solo across the Atlantic Ocean, and the only person who had flown across the Atlantic twice.
That's so cool.
Obviously, people were obsessed. It was a big rigmarole.
When she landed, she was like, you guys will never believe
apparently what happened
what
is,
I did with the fucking altimeter.
Apparently what happened is she landed in a farmer's field and a pasture in Northern Ireland for like sheep, I think. And the owner of the farm went out to check it out, and the wife like stayed inside because she was like busy doing something.
Oh my God, can you imagine?
And she apparently popped out of the cockpit and said, "I've come from America."
So
the only
cute.
person who'd ever done it.
So
I'm sure the
cute.
guy in Ireland was like, "Wait, what?" I also didn't write this, but she didn't bring any money or luggage or change of clothes.
Oh, it's just her tomato juice and soup.
She had to borrow money to send a telegram to George and say, "I made it."
Well, at least they knew she was good for it.
Yeah, true. She also, George had given her a $20 bill before her flight, and she said, "Well, that's not a very big allowance for a trip to Europe." And when she landed, she used that 20 to like exchange for money to like pay for a cable. And then once like people came and met her, and it was like she's Amelia Earhart, she got money, went and paid the guy so she could have the 20 back, signed it, and gave it to George.
Oh,
as a souvenir.
That's so cute.
In July of 1932, the same year, she decided to attempt a record-setting transcontinental flight from Los Angeles to Newark.
I've done that flight.
Her goal was to beat Frank Hawk's record of 17 hours and 38 minutes. Because of a fuel feed issue, she was forced to land in Columbus, Ohio. The issue took an hour and a half to fix, and she still landed in Newark in 19 hours and 14 minutes, which was good enough to set the women's continental speed record. Her flight time was 17 hours and 59 minutes, which was only 21 minutes over the record.
Ooh.
George, meanwhile, had actually gotten himself a job at Paramount on the editorial board.
Wow.
Because sometimes when your career falls apart, you pivot. He stayed in LA while Amelia went back to the East Coast. During this time, she developed a very close relationship with Jean Vidal, the father of Gore Vidal. He was an athlete who had graduated first in his class with a degree in civil engineering. And after an illustrious career as a West Point football and track star, he had gone into the Air Service and become West Point's first flying instructor. While in the Army, he competed in the 1920 Olympics. It's implied that their relation... The 1920 Olympics?
In what sport?
I think in track.
Okay.
It's implied that their relationship was romantic, and Jean would often come visit her. And Gore Vidal remembered her as a fixture in his childhood, and they would bond over poetry.
Oh.
Apparently he was in an Edgar Allan Poe phase, and she was like, "No, there's a lot of like way different like female poets you should be reading."
That's so good.
I know.
If you care about someone, get them out of their Poe phase.
Also, don't forget, Amelia herself, she loved poetry, and she wrote several poems, one of which I will read in this series.
Maybe Amelia is that girl. She has like so many interests that she just does for fun. She doesn't monetize her side hobbies. She's like opting out of side hustle culture. She really is.
She's this girl. In August, she decided to try for another transcontinental flight. She made the trip in nonstop in 19 hours and 7 minutes and racked up another title, which is first woman to fly nonstop across the U.S.
Do we think that the guy who got like 17 hours and 40 minutes, whoever had the record, did he just have a faster plane?
Probably.
That's dumb.
Yeah.
I feel like we need to like
I know.
regulate these competitions.
I know. The same year, Amelia met Eleanor Roosevelt.
Wow.
Just a few weeks after FDR was elected. Eleanor was kind of depressed at the time because she didn't really want to do all the first lady duties. Yeah. She wanted to like go have her own life.
First lady duties. No, I get that. I would hate that.
If you don't know much about Eleanor Roosevelt, she was like a huge radical in her time. She was a human rights activist. She fought for poverty alleviation, workers' rights, access to education, civil rights. Before he was president, when FDR developed paralysis, she was the one who convinced him he needed to stay in politics. And she would actually give speeches in his place when he couldn't because he was ill.
So cool.
She also later traveled to the front lines during World War II and was the first U.S. delegate to the United Nations. I could do a whole episode about her, but she's not a mystery. She's just a badass.
It's a mystery how she's so badass.
Yeah, there you go. When she met Amelia, they obviously immediately became friends. And Eleanor was like, I want to learn to fly. Amelia was like, I'll be your instructor.
Oh, yes.
The two arranged everything. She got the vision test. Amelia arranged for a plane for her to learn on. Amelia got her learner's permit, and she sent it to Amelia with a letter saying, basically all that's left to do is to convince FDR to like support this endeavor. But ultimately, he convinced Eleanor not to go through with the lessons because they couldn't afford to buy a plane.
President couldn't afford to buy a plane?
No.
This country's garbage.
I think in the book it said that like they could have asked his mom for money, but like they didn't want to ask his mom.
I don't want to ask my mom. I'm president. I'm president. I'm not asking my mom for plane money.
Babe, do you need a plane? We just got a horseless carriage. Just kidding.
Horseless carriage.
Cars existed, but Henry Ford was still alive. Like, so
it's like the horrors of what Amazon is going to become.
Yeah.
They're going to look back and be like, this is when you still had to go on a computer to use Amazon.
When you couldn't just like press beep boop in your brain and
when you couldn't just blink at an object and have it appear in your hand.
So Eleanor was bummed, but then one night after a fancy dinner, Amelia was like, do you want to go for a night flight? She arranged for a pilot to take them up, and they, with their husbands, they didn't even bother to change out of their evening gowns.
Oh my God.
They all dressed up. They just like got into a plane, and then Eleanor got to sit in the cockpit with the pilot, and he like showed her all the controls so she could like learn how to fly, even though
oh
she
my God,
couldn't
what
learn
were
how to
they
fly.
wearing?
I don't know, but I imagine it was pretty fancy.
I think it's probably pretty fancy.
But I think it was probably pretty fancy. Amelia did a lot of stuff that I don't even have time to cover in a 3-part series. She worked for multiple commercial airlines to help them get off the ground. She was wrote lol.
Okay, great.
She was like their publicity and their complaint department, and she would field complaints about the airline. Like she was the person who like wrote the letters that were like tried to help people like resolve their complaints with the airlines.
They were like, this miracle is too incredible. Can you make this more inconvenient and more expensive, please?
Literally. Because at the time, people were afraid to fly. Like it wasn't super safe. And so she was like, you guys, this is the future, I promise. So she worked for several different airlines. She made more transcontinental flights. She gave lectures all over the country about women in STEM and women in flight. In 1 year alone, she gave 136 lectures in between her flights.
Oh my God.
Which is actually how she met some of these people that were so pivotal in her life. I don't have time to cover all of them. If you want to read about all this stuff, Susan Butler's East of the Dawn is 500 pages, and you can learn everything that happened. Despite the alleged affair with Jean Vidal, which if it existed, George definitely knew about it. George and Amelia
had a prenup.
I know.
They had a letter.
Yeah. George and Amelia stayed super close and super in love. Helen, who did most of the secretarial work for Amelia, remembered looking out the window in 1932 and seeing George running down the lawn with Amelia in a wheelbarrow.
Oh.
And they were laughing. And
this is my dream love. Don't put me in a wheelbarrow. That scares me, but
I just love it because this is a woman who like flies the first planes, but she like gets a thrill out of like going down the like lawn in a wheelbarrow.
The thrill is doing it with George.
Exactly.
Aww.
Another thing I don't have time to go into is that in 1933, Amelia launched her own fashion line.
I need you to go into this.
She sewed it by hand with one seamstress on her old sewing machine in her New York apartment. It was carried in several department stores. She eventually had to shut it down because she basically just didn't have time to keep it up, and it was the Depression, so obviously like people weren't buying stuff as much.
Did you see any photos?
There are photos. I will post them on the Instagram.
Can you give me like just a vibe?
They're basically her signature outfits. It's like like tailored pants, like crepe blouses
with the big collar.
Mm-hmm.
I want to wear
this is the best part. Because it was the Depression and women couldn't afford it was moderately priced. because it was the
It was like
Depression.
Macy's, but not
Yeah.
Nordy's.
Yeah. And because it was the Depression and women couldn't afford that, she published her sewing patterns in the Women's Home Companion magazine so women could make them at home. But if you bought them, they had a little tag that had her name in cursive and a little plane flying through it.
It's so cute.
It's really fucking cute.
How do we get one
I'll
of
post it
those?
on the Instagram.
I
I think
wanna
if you
see
got
it.
your hands on anything with that tag in it now, it's probably worth millions of dollars.
I would pay millions of dollars for that tag.
Me too. Okay, back to flying. So, in 1933, the Bendix, which Susan Butler calls the Kentucky Derby of air races, decided to allow women to enter. So the Bendix was a cross-country race. Every year it alternated where it started and ended. Like it changed directions. This year it went from New York to California. In 1933, they decided to allow women, and Amelia and Ruth Nichols both entered. Ruth encountered mechanical problems with her landing gear, and it took her 3 days to complete the trip. Amelia's motor started heating up over Kansas due to headwinds, and she was making such bad time that when she landed to refuel, she just ended up spending the night. And the next day, her hatch blew open, and she had to land to have it repaired. By the time she made it to LA, she had to circle for half an hour because there was a trophy race happening at that exact moment, and she'd missed the 6 p.m. deadline for the Bendix. But she finished, and she was the first woman to ever compete in the Bendix and finish.
I was just thinking, like, do we think men were like, see?
You're about to find out.
Ugh. So predictable.
The following year, Cliff Henderson, the managing director of the National Air Races, banned women from entering because a 26-year-old woman named Florence Klingensmith died during a trophy race when the fabric of her wing gave out. Worth noting that her GB plane, which is what they were called, was known to be a dangerous plane, and hers was the third GB plane to crash in 3 days. The other 2 were piloted by men, and no one said men shouldn't be flying. But Cliff Henderson, who was known as the Barnum of aviation, and if you know anything about P.T. Barnum, you know that's
not
probably
a compliment.
It's probably true in multiple senses of the word. Also worth noting, Cliff Henderson and his brother Randall founded Palm Desert, California in the 1940s.
Boo.
They were like, you know what the desert needs?
Grass.
Just the plant that needs 2 inches of water a week. Let's put it in the desert.
Okay, so what I'm seeing here is like a lot of dry dirt, sand, and I think what we should probably put here is like golf courses and pools.
Retail. I'm seeing retail?
Yes, I'm seeing nightclubs. And everything and anything that requires water. This is
the spot.
I always say that Palm Springs is like the darkest example of human hubris. I've said it before.
Yeah.
And the fact that it was founded by fucking Airplane Barnum makes so much sense.
Yes.
It is truly the hardest place for me to, like, it's...
The guy who said women aren't strong enough to fly planes was like, grass is definitely strong enough to live in the desert.
Unbelievable. It's like, it's so emotionally dark for me to go there. I hate it so much.
I think maybe you need to go into city design.
Yeah. I would just be like, fucking stop.
You're like, don't put that there. You're like, whatever you're going to put there, don't put it there.
Oh, is that the desert? Leave it. That's for lizards.
Just leave it. That's for lizards. Leave it. That's for lizards.
Put windmills up for sure,
Yeah.
but the rest of it is for lizards.
So remember Cliff Henderson because he's going to come back.
No, I don't want to
As
remember him.
all good villains do. In 1934, Amelia was giving a speech attended by the president of Purdue University, Edward C. Elliott. He was really invested in advancing women's careers and also in aviation. And after hearing Amelia speak, he said to her, "We want you at Purdue." And she said, "I'd like that."
Aww.
A few months later, he sent her an offer. He wanted to create a department dedicated to the study of careers for women and make Amelia the department head. She's also been fighting for and most of her speeches were about women in STEM, basically, and how there were careers for women if they wanted them.
I love that. This is such a cool life because it's like, I think we talked about this the other day, or you sent me a quote about it where it's like, don't let your job or your compensation define your worth.
Yeah.
And I think it's a cool way to like, and I have this deep insecurity where I think that I don't have like a thing that I'm
Yeah.
good at. And I'm surrounded by people who are like very, very good at one specific thing.
Yeah.
And I don't have that.
Yeah.
And I kind of am like, well, like if I was friends with Amelia Earhart, I would be like, well, I can't fly planes that good. But she's also like doing all these other things that she's passionate about and good at.
Yeah.
And I feel like that kind of life has kind of been erased by capitalism.
I agree. Well, we've talked about this before. Like, I ran into a problem where I had monetized all my hobbies and I didn't have anything that like brought me joy because everything became a job.
Yeah.
And then there's that Oscar Wilde quote that I really like. That's like, if a person becomes a judge or whatever, their punishment is that they're a judge. But like, if you never become anything, your reward is that you can always just be whatever you are.
Yeah.
It's hard because capitalism just crushes your spirit.
Capitalism has ruined nearly everything.
Yeah. Agreed. So yeah, part of the offer was that he was going to let her choose the other educators who'd be part of the department. Because part of the problem, and I don't remember if I talk about this, but a lot of women in STEM were basically like bullied out by their professors and their counselors who were just like talk them out of pursuing
Are
STEM.
you sure?
Yeah.
Now they're just being bullied out by their peers.
Yeah. Well, that was also a huge problem. She would also get to give constructive advice on other programs about making them more inclusive and acceptable to women. More acceptable to women is not the word I wanted. More inclusive and accessible to women.
Yes.
And she would be chief consultant for the university's work in aeronautical engineering.
That's so cool.
So he was like, I want you to do women's stuff and also you get to do plane stuff.
I wish someone would let me do lady stuff and also plane stuff.
I know.
Not plane stuff. I'm scared of planes.
She accepted, obviously. But this was not a small task because that year before she joined, the Purdue Personnel Department secured 84 jobs for graduating men and brought out recruiters who recruited men into another 38 jobs. Guess how many women they got jobs for?
I'm going to guess 0 to 1.
The answer is 4.
Oh. They exceeded my very, very low expectations.
They brought out no recruiters.
Surprise.
And most of the jobs were in home ec. Because that's what women were trained for.
It's like a parody.
Yeah, that's what women were trained for at the time. And if they were in STEM, they were like counseled out, basically. And there was a lot of pushback about helping women get jobs because it was the Depression. So everybody was already out of a job. So they were like, if women take jobs, what will the men do? So by this time, women had made many of the first flights in aviation. And really, the final frontier was crossing the Pacific Ocean. No one had done it solo, period.
Have you ever done a flight across, not personally, obviously, but have you ever flown across the Pacific?
Not the whole way.
Just Hawaii.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's far, dude.
Yeah, it's really far.
So Amelia decided to make a flight from Honolulu to California.
That's far, dude. That's like far to begin with.
I know. Amelia and George packed up their home in New York and they moved to 10513 Valley Spring Lane, which is in North Hollywood, Toluca Lake, and it is still there. God. In December, Helen Rishi, a member of the 99s, became the first woman to become a pilot for a scheduled airline, aka the first female commercial airline pilot.
What airline?
It doesn't exist anymore, and I don't remember what it was called. Amelia and George made arrangements for the flight, for her Honolulu flight, installing a radio in her plane, because until this point, radios were too heavy to fly.
God.
Civilian planes didn't have radios at this point in history.
That's so crazy.
Only military. And even that was like fairly recent. Hers was the first civilian plane to have two-way radio capability.
Wow.
Can you imagine being so on the cutting edge of a field that you're like, will you install a two-way radio in my plane so I can fly from Honolulu to LA? Because no one has done any of this before.
That's so cool.
At this point, 10 flyers had been killed in attempting to fly between Hawaii and California.
I don't know if you know the answer to this, but how much farther is it across the Atlantic than it is from Hawaii to the West Coast?
I'm not positive, but I do have a time for this flight, so maybe that will help us.
Yes.
She took off from Honolulu at 4:30 p.m. All the ships traveling between Honolulu and the mainland kept their searchlights on all night so she could see them and use them to navigate. And each one that saw her was prepared to radio her position to the world because everyone was like tuning into the radio to hear
made me
her
cry.
make this flight. Her radio was tuned into the Honolulu broadcasting station HGU. And at one point during the flight, George radioed to her and said, AE, the noise of your motor interferes with your broadcast. Will you please try to speak a little louder so we can hear you? Because we stan a husband who cares about audio quality.
That's my dream.
She said that hearing his broadcast was really one of the high points of the flight.
I think I would weep. I'm
me
a
too.
little misty.
On January 12th, 1935, Amelia Earhart touched down at Oakland Airport, where over 10,000 people awaited her arrival after completing the first solo flight ever made between the Hawaiian Islands and the American mainland. She was in the air for 18 hours and 16 minutes.
Jesus Christ.
Amelia stayed in California until April when she flew to Mexico City to attempt another record-setting flight from Mexico City to New York. Because of the elevation of Mexico City and the amount of gas that she would need for the flight, she needed a runway that was much longer than one that existed at the time, so the military in Mexico made one for her in the lake bed of Lake Texcoco.
They have the resources to do such cool things, and they don't choose to do them. That's such a cool way to use military budget.
I agree. No one had successfully flown from Mexico City to the New York area because of that elevation gas problem. Charles Lindbergh had made it all the way to Washington, D.C. So during her flight, a crowd gathered at Hoover Airport thinking that maybe she would touch down there like Charles Lindbergh had done. As she flew over Washington, Jean Vidal radioed to her and said, "You've done a splendid job, so come down." To which she radioed, "Thanks for the invitation. I'm going through."
She was like,
When she touched down at Newark Airport an hour later, crowds rushed her plane once again. She had just broken 3 records, set a new nonstop record between Mexico City and Newark, a new women's nonstop record for the distance, and a new speed record from Mexico City to Washington, beating Charles Lindbergh's time.
She didn't even fucking stop.
No.
That is painful.
I love her.
I love that.
In September of 1935, the airline pressured Helen Rishi into resigning. In
Why?
January, the Airline Pilots Association had rejected her application for membership, saying that the idea was preposterous, that women weren't strong enough to handle a plane in bad weather, and, quote, if the practice of hiring women to pilot airliners continued, where would that leave the men?
On
That's
the
a
fucking
quote.
ground.
That's a fucking quote
That
from
is
their...
so embarrassing. I love the argument that it's like women are physically incapable of like lifting things. And I'm like, ugh.
Some men are so fragile, I swear to God. This
So
is why they should not be
fragile.
allowed to be president. Okay.
Can you
Can
believe
you
there's
imagine
a
being
man
so insecure?
president? God.
The Airline Pilots Association threatened to strike. And as it's clear, they were all men. So James Condon, the head of the airline, folded and told them that he only hired her for publicity purposes.
You know what's so embarrassing about that is that they have jobs.
Yeah, I know.
They're gonna be fine. I don't understand.
He
It
knew that
doesn't
he
make
would
sense.
get blowback from the public. So he basically reduced her schedule to like 1 flight a month and had her make appearances at luncheons and give tours of the airport.
Oh my God.
She resigned after a few months.
I would too. That's awful.
Amelia wrote a stern letter about it, which the press got a hold of, and it made front page news. Then she organized a protest in Washington, D.C.
Yes. Which she flew to.
In 1936, Amelia acquired a brand new Lockheed Electra. She was one of the first people to have one, along with Howard Hughes. She took it to Los Angeles to enter the Bendix,
Yes.
because that year they had decided to let women enter again. And she brought Helen Rishi as her co-pilot.
Yes. Women lifting other women up. Literally.
In a plane. 7 planes entered the Bendix that year, including Amelia's friends Louise Thaden and Blanche Noyes. They entered as co-pilots, and Laura Ingalls also entered flying solo. We don't love Laura Ingalls because during World War II she worked with Germany. Boo.
Boo.
But the other 4 planes were piloted by men. Just after takeoff, a bolt on Amelia and Helen's hatch came out and the hatch blew open. It took them 2 hours to fix it, and according to Amelia, the wind almost sucked them out of the cockpit.
Oh my God. That's one of my greatest fears.
Yeah. When they stopped to refuel, they had to have it wired shut, and they lost a lot of time. Louise Thaden and Blanche Noyes' heading indicator, which is basically like the compass that tells them what direction they're going, and their radio broke just after they learned that one of their refueling stops was not usable due to fog. With no heading indicator and no radio, Louise and Blanche dodged a bunch of thunderstorms. And when they landed in Los Angeles, they were absolutely sure that they were in last place, or as Louise said, sure that they were the cow's tail of the race.
That's a cute way to say it.
When they climbed out of the plane, they were met by what Susan Butler calls the crestfallen faces of Vincent Bendix and Cliff Henderson. Cliff said, quote, "I'm afraid you won the Bendix race.
Oh.
I wish you hadn't, but if it had to be a woman, I'm glad it was you."
Oh.
And then Laura Ingalls landed right behind them and took second place.
Ugh. This has been a roller coaster of 10 seconds.
Ladies and gentlemen, the man who brought grass to the desert.
You know, people show you who they are.
It's true.
If they bring grass to the desert, it doesn't get better from there.
Amelia and Helen came in fifth, but her friends said that you could sense her pride that Blanche and Louise had won the race. Blanche said, "I don't think there was a jealous bone in her body."
I think I want to name my children Blanche and Louise.
I know.
I was always planning on Louise. Don't take that.
I won't.
I think Blanche is such a... Blanche needs to like a...
It needs to make a comeback.
Yeah.
Yeah. And all the women felt super vindicated. And Blanche, by the way, weighed like 85 pounds. So this was like, oh, not strong enough to fly a plane? She beat all the men. She beat all the men.
I would also argue, if anything, being lighter is probably better
for a plane.
Flying planes made out of tablecloth.
What the women didn't know was that at this time, Amelia was already 1 month into making plans for her next big flight. Louise Thaden would later remark, "It is the only major flight she ever attempted for purely selfish reasons. She wanted to fly around the world because it would be fun."
Don't you dare say.
And that's where we will pick back up with the stunning conclusion of our 3-part series on the life of Amelia Earhart.
I love her and I hate men. Today's heroes.
Yeah.
Amelia Earhart. Women in general. Planes.
Purdue University.
Purdue University. Losers. I mean, wait. Villains. Capitalism. And men. End of list.
Yeah.
Wow. I can't believe I finally met the man whose fault Palm Springs is.
Yeah, technically he founded Palm Desert, but yeah. I did not realize going into this research how much stuff she did.
She did so much stuff.
Her life is so much more interesting than her death, and the only thing we fucking know about her is her death. Like,
yeah.
She accomplished so much. Like, she was an activist. She was a social worker. She was like fighting for women's rights, women in STEM. At a time, by the way, we're not even in the 50s yet.
Yeah.
We're not even in like women going to work in the factories in World War II yet. I don't think we as a society like talk about her through the right lens.
No, I agree. What also really inspires me about her is that she seems like she just had so much fun.
Me too.
Like, I know I'm railing against capitalism a lot today, but I've been railing against capitalism a lot for the past like 2 months on like an hourly basis. And I just feel like we don't have fun anymore.
I know. I feel that way too. There's no like play in our lives. Like we've like, because you have to start cutting corners when you're like trying to stay alive. And the first thing that goes is play.
Yeah.
Like the first thing that goes is fun. And she did things for the fun of it.
Yeah.
She actually, that's the title of her memoir, I think, is for the fun of it. Yeah. I could be wrong. I have to double check. But she just did stuff because it was exciting and fun and she wanted to do it. And then like when she wasn't doing exciting, fun stuff, she was like working to advance women in society and like aeronautics and advance aviation. Like people were afraid to fly and she was like, you can do it. Anyone can do it. There's a letter someone wrote to her, like a young woman who was like, I want to fly. And she wrote her back a letter and she was like, you can fly. And it's not that it wasn't hard because it was really fucking hard. It seemed like it was never a question in her mind. Because she was doing stuff that was so, I mean, it was dangerous. Like these planes literally like would just explode sometimes. Yeah. And she... Like
the fact that you're like the top of your plane could blow off and then your radar could fail within like 2 seconds of each other. And you're like, oh man.
Yeah. Yeah, it's true.
If my car maintenance light goes on, I'm like, this is it.
Yeah.
I'm walking.
Me too.
This is amazing. I can't wait for the next part.
So, yeah, the next part is the next part. We'll get there.
I'm sad already.
But I just really wanted to devote more time to her accomplishments and like who she was as a person. Because also, even just like setting all her accomplishments aside, like she's just such an incredible person. The person who goes to the settlement house after her transatlantic flight, you know, like the person who doesn't talk about herself. She like asked how the women were doing. She's just such a fascinating person.
She's like cool.
She's very cool. And not like in a cool girl way.
No, she's just cool.
She's just cool.
Ugh, I love her.
I love her too.
Very good research.
Thank you. Thank you for listening.
Thank you for
and
listening.
watching if you're watching. We don't know.
Stay in your lane.
Fuck all the fuck up.
smooching. One day I'll learn how to do that accent.
You can do it.
You can fly.
That was good.
It was okay.
You can do it.
I'll work on it.
Okay.
Okay.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.